You know, I was once accused of praying too many times in the course of a worship service, but I'm gonna risk that again and just say, let's just pray. Before we open up the scriptures, let's just pray one more time. Gracious and merciful God, pour out your spirit on us, on your people who are gathered here in this place. God, as we open up your word, your scriptures, God, open us up to hear whatever it is that you might have to speak to us, your people, in this place this morning. In the name of your son, Jesus, and in the power of your spirit, I pray. Amen. I promise I'm only gonna pray one more time. So, if we haven't had the chance to meet yet, my name is Cade Matthews. I'm one of the pastors on staff here. Basically, I'm on the discipleship team, so I kind of float around and have different responsibilities at different campuses. But the most important responsibility that I have, my favorite part of my job, is being your discipleship pastor here. And I don't tell that to all the girls, I'm just saying. We love being at Wood Forest. It's just a delight to be a part of this community, and I'm just so grateful when I get to be out here, and so grateful to get to bring a word to you this morning. Pastor Brent is safe and sound in kind of a little adventure that he's having this week. He's gone off, visited some friends, spent a few days in a monastery, Pastor Brent type stuff. And he's having a blast, and we just can't wait to see and just to hear what the Lord has done and how the Lord has moved and spoke to him this past week. He'll be back with us here next Sunday. So he's safe. We didn't do anything to him. He's okay. We're talking about Exodus out here in Wood Forest. We've been kind of moving along through the book of Exodus for a number of weeks now. And we started way back in the beginning with the people of Israel, God's people enslaved in Egypt. They cried out to God. God heard their call, their prayer, and he answered. He sent a man named Moses to come and be God's instrument, the tool that God used to deliver them. And so there were some plagues, yes, and there were all kinds of other different things that happened there. Pharaoh's heart was hard, all that kind of stuff. And then they came out of Egypt, and they went down through the Red Sea and came out the other side, a free people, and God provided for them as they've moved through the desert, through the wilderness, and took them to Mount Sinai, where God gave them 10 commandments. And then I think last Sunday, y'all went grocery shopping, as I understand it. But we're gonna pick it up right here today in chapter 24. We're gonna be in chapter 24. The scripture for today is actually Exodus 24 to Exodus 31. So that's a lot of Bible, y'all. That is 8 full chapters, and they are not short chapters. They are fairly long chapters. And so I read them in one sitting. I wanted to just kind of, I read them more than once, but I wanted to read it all in one sitting without really taking a break, kind of all in one fell swoop, and it took me about 40 minutes. So we're not going to be able to do justice to all this. We're not going to be able to even touch on all of this. Most of it is about the tabernacle. Almost all of it is about the tabernacle. 7 of the 8 chapters are this detailed description of this tent that God wanted his people to build. The tent of meeting, the tabernacle. This tent is supposed to be put in the middle of their camp, and it's their tent of meeting. It's where they go to meet with the Lord. And so for 7 chapters, God describes to Moses what he wants them to build, and all the furniture, and what they're supposed to make it out of, and how many cubits long the tent is supposed to be, and how many cubits wide the tent is supposed to be, and how many cubits wide and long this part of the tent is supposed to be, and how many cubits wide and long this piece of furniture is supposed to be, and what kind of material they're supposed to make it out of. My wife has taken to calling this sermon Cubits and You. So thankfully, we're not really gonna talk that much about cubits, but we are gonna get to you eventually. So this is what 7 out of the 8 chapters are. It's just describing in somewhat maybe painstaking detail this tent and the furniture they're supposed to build, to put in the tent. And what's kind of funny is it's not just 7 chapters where God is telling them how to build it. We get basically the same instructions over again in a few chapters after chapter 31 when they actually build it. They tell us in painstaking detail how they built it. And so we get like probably about a third of the 40 chapters of Exodus, probably at least 13 chapters of the book of Exodus are taken up with just instructions and narration of the details of the dimensions and the materials and how they're supposed to arrange and build this tent. So I want to, at some level, I want to get at what's the big deal? What's the deal with this tent at some level, right? And why is this so important to spend a third of the book of Exodus talking about this tent? But before we get there, I think we need to deal with one important category, one important word, one important concept that will, I think, help us to understand what's going on here in just in the book of Exodus and maybe just in the Bible in general. And that is the word covenant. Some of y'all have been around church long enough. You've heard the word covenant before. Anybody know the word covenant? All right, 3 of you, great. So the truth is, like, if you've been around the church in for any length of time and you are shy at hand raising, you've heard this word covenant. You just have, and you've heard pastors and preachers talk about this. You've been to a Bible study maybe where somebody went on for a long time about the word covenant. And the truth is, if I'm honest, it can be a little hard for me to kind of the way a lot of times preachers will talk about the word covenant, the way a lot of times this gets kind of thrown around. I don't know that it, there's almost like a so what factor to it. Like, it's almost like, why do we need this technical term? Maybe we don't need the technical term, but we're gonna use the technical term anyway. So I wanna do 3 things. I wanna talk about 3 different covenants. Only one of them is a biblical covenant. I wanna give 3 different covenants. One of them is the covenant that we're gonna talk about today, the covenant from Exodus. And then the other 2 are just kind of different covenants that I wanna just sort of talk about to help you understand what a covenant is and help you maybe to kind of wrap your arms around this biblical covenant a little bit better. That makes sense? So that's our itinerary. That's where we're headed today. So not quite cubits in you, but maybe covenants in you. There we go. Yeah. So that's what we're gonna do. So covenant. So the first covenant that I want to talk about is what historians and Bible nerds call a suzerain vassal covenant or a suzerain vassal treaty. Because a covenant is just a treaty. It's just a treaty or a contract between 2 parties that are coming together and kind of defining a relationship in a particular kind of way. And so what would happen in this first kind of covenant is around 3,500 or so years ago, give or take a millennium here and there, when Moses and the Israelites were wandering around the desert, sometimes you'd have one of these situations where a great and mighty king with a really big army would come knocking on the door of a smaller country with a smaller army. And he would say, something to the effect of, hey, hi, I'm great and mighty King so-and-so, and look at my army. Clearly, we could mop the floor with you guys and kill you all and put your heads on spikes along the roadside. We'd rather not do that. We'd rather not take the trouble, so can we work something out here, maybe? And the weak king says, oh yeah, that sounds like a great deal. Let's work something out so our heads don't end up on spikes. And so they would work something out. They would work out an arrangement. This is real. This is not a joke. This is not a drill, people. This is what actually happened. The ancient Near East was a brutal place. So this is what they would do. And so the weak king would be expected to pay some tribute, maybe some heads of cattle, some sheep, some goats, some shekels of silver and gold, this kind of thing. And then, the great and mighty king wouldn't kill everyone, which is nice. And he would agree to protect them maybe if some other big scary king came along, the other big scary king would come and protect them. And so they'd kind of hammer out this deal. And the weak country would maybe give some of their young men to fight in the strong country's army, and they'd work out a deal. And basically, they would be a part of the bigger empire, and they would pay handsomely for that privilege. And the rich king would walk away, not having spilled any blood, and basically just having it's just sophisticated extortion is what that was really. It's hostage taking, it's terrorism, and this is just. It's how they did it. It was a cheap way to build an empire. And So then the rich and powerful king would go home a little richer and more powerful, or he'd go knocking at the door of the next weak kingdom down the road and do the same thing there. And so this is what they would do. Now, there's three things that happen anytime you have a covenant. This goes for really all covenants that I'm aware of. There's there's promises that you exchange. I'll do this for you, you'll do this for me. And there's always some kind of sign of promises that happen. They do different things, different ritualistic things, or they'll build a monument, they'll set up a pillar, this kind of thing. And then there's always a feast. It seems like there's always a food that happens. There's some kind of party that happens. And then when it's kind of done and the covenant is cut or the thing is sealed, then the parties kind of move on with their lives, but they kind of have to live into this new arrangement. Their lives have to change to kind of match the promises that they've made. That makes sense? So you see that in this kind of covenant. The big powerful king comes along and extorts some promises out of the weak people, and they make some promises to each other, and there's this ceremonial kind of thing. There's a great feast, and then they go about their way, and the rich king gets to collect his booty, and the rest is the rest, right? So it's basically, there's a similar thing that happens in the Bible, in really all the covenants in the Bible in different ways. But I was struck by this in Exodus 24, 1 through 11. If you got a Bible and you want to join me there, that's where I'm going to be. I'm not going to read all 40 minutes, all 8 chapters, just 3 minutes. It's going to be okay. Okay. So we read, then the Lord said to Moses, come up to the Lord, you and Aaron, Nadab and Abihu, and 70 of the elders of Israel. You are to worship at a distance, but Moses alone is to approach the Lord. The others must not come near, and the people may not come up with him. So we have a meeting between a strong and powerful king and a weaker nation. Now, this is obviously different in a lot of different ways. Maybe the most obvious way that this is different is this king, this Lord, didn't come knocking with threats, but this Lord came and redeemed. This Lord came to this weak country not to extort some gold and silver and sheep out of them, but to save and to rescue them and to redeem them. And so this has some similarities, but there's that one really big, important difference. And there's another difference that I think is really even more significant that we'll get to in just a minute. But still you have this idea of God is going to meet with these people and he's going to become their king. He's going to become their emperor. He's going to become their Lord. Okay, so verse 3, when Moses went and told the people all the Lord's words and laws, they responded with one voice, everything the Lord has said, we will do. Moses then wrote down everything the Lord had said. He got up early the next morning, built an altar at the foot of the mountain, set up 12 stone pillars representing the 12 tribes of Israel. Then he sent young Israelite men, and they offered burnt offerings and sacrificed young bulls as fellowship offerings to the Lord. Moses took half of the blood, put it in bowls, and the other half he splashed against the altar. Then he took the book of the covenant and read it to the people. They responded, we will do everything the Lord has said. We will obey. Moses then took the blood, sprinkled it on the people, and said, this is the blood of the covenant that the Lord has made with you in accordance with all these words. So notice just tons of promises, layers and layers of promises. God's saying all kinds of things. They're writing it down. They're reading it. The people are saying, yes, we'll do it. All kinds of different things going on there around promises, all kinds of signs that kind of point to and represent the promises. There's all kinds of tribute, all kinds of offerings that are being made. They're building an altar. They're writing down the promises in a book, all kinds of different artifacts here. They're building these 12 stone pillars representing the 12 tribes. There's this whole thing with blood, and they're sprinkling blood on the people. I just want to single that out for a minute, the blood of the covenant. We don't have time to really dig into that because there's a lot of layers there, but I just want to point out one thing. When Moses sprinkles the blood on the people, they're living in a world before laundry. So when you get these, you're gonna get, if you're in the splash zone in the first few rows there, you're gonna get some droplets of blood on your cloak, on your robe, whatever you're wearing in those days, right? And I don't think they understood about soap yet. So I don't think there's laundry in this culture. So those droplets of blood are going to be with you for a long time. You're taking that with you for a while until your cloak gets dirty enough to where it gets covered up by other stains, or until the cloak just wears out and you have to get a new one, right? You're taking that blood with you. So some of these signs, they're gonna leave the altar and the stone pillars up, but they're leaving Mount Sinai. They're gonna end up going someplace else eventually. But at least some of these signs, the book and some of the stuff in the tabernacle, we're gonna bring some of those signs with us, including on us. Okay. So we got all kinds of promises happening, all kinds of signs of the promises that they're being kind of marked by. And then finally, verse 9, Moses and Aaron, Nadab and Abihu, and the 70 elders of Israel went up and saw the God of Israel. Under his feet was something like a pavement made of lapis lazuli, as bright blue as the sky. But God did not raise his hand against these leaders of the Israelites. They saw God, and they ate and drank. So again, they have this meeting, this glorious meeting, kind of a throne room kind of a scene, kind of a feel to this. But they have this meeting with this great Lord who's becoming their king, who's adopting them as his people. And after having shared these promises and being marked by these signs, they go up and they feast. They feast with the great king. So now it's time for life change. And of course, when you think about how their lives were supposed to have changed, probably immediately for many of us, where you're gonna go is the 10 Commandments. And they're supposed to live a certain way, right? They're supposed to do these certain things. They're supposed to not do these other certain things. And if maybe you're thinking about all the sacrifices and all the purity laws and restrictions and all these kinds of things. I just wanna point out, word count isn't everything, but I just wanna point out that part of Exodus is only like 3 or 4 chapters. Much greater is the part that talks about a different kind of life change, a different sort of thing that is gonna mark them, a different sort of thing that they're going to be living around and near, and that is, again, the tabernacle. This arrangement is very different, not just because this God comes to rescue and redeem, and it's less of an extortion act and more of an adoption. It's more of a he's taking this weak people, this weak nation, this great and mighty king is taking this weak people, this small people, and making them his. He's making them his people. But I think maybe kind of to sharpen that a little bit, what the tabernacle represents is just how different this is. Because that strong king that normally comes and picks on that weak nation, when he's done getting all he can get out, in terms of gold and goats and soldiers out of this weak nation, he leaves. He goes somewhere else. He goes to extort another country, or he goes back home to his palace. But that's not how this works. That's not how this works at all. God goes to in great detail to instruct them on how to build a dwelling place, a tent, a tabernacle for him to dwell among them. This God isn't just adopting this nation and then going back to heaven, back to his palace, this God is going to dwell among his people. In this way, this covenant, really the biblical covenants in general, are a lot more like a covenant that most of us are a lot more familiar with. Maybe it's the only covenant that most of us are all that familiar with. It's a covenant that actually probably, I would imagine many, if not most, of the people in this room are a part of. And that's the covenant of marriage. Think about a wedding, right? It's the same kind of thing. You make two parties come together to kind of seal this relationship. You make promises to each other. You exchange different signs of the promise. I'm wearing one on my hand. You probably, you might do other signs, like some people like to mix different colors of sand together, or like they tie a knot, or they do these other kinds of things. There's these kind of ceremonial words that we say, and then at the end of the ceremony, there's a kiss. These are all signs of these promises, right, that we make to each other to love, honor, cherish, keep, to be faithful to, right? And then what happens? Well, there's a feast. There's a party, right? And sometimes there's, a lot of times there's a full meal, a full feast. But at the very least, we usually in our culture at least have cake, right? Even if you're kind of trying to save a few bucks, you're gonna at least have like a cupcake or something at a bare minimum, right? You got to have cake for some reason at a wedding. But you're going to have some kind of food, right? And there's some kind of celebration. And then you go off to kind of live into these promises. And to me, at least in a kind of ideal case, I understand sometimes the kids do it differently, but my wife and I, we lived in two different addresses when we showed up to our wedding. But when we left we left to move in together, right? Our lives combined, we became one family. We became one thing, right? And this is what God's doing here. God is wanting to not be a God without his people. He's wanting to move in with his people. We see this in the tabernacle where God moves in with his people behind a veil, behind a tent, behind a curtain, if you will. But God does this even more fully, even more dramatically, even more richly in Jesus. In Jesus. John 1:14 says, the word of God became flesh and tabernacled among us. Some translations just say dwelt among us, but the word literally there in Greek is to pitch a tent. Like God's word became flesh, that's Jesus. And he tabernacled among us. He moved into our neighborhood. He pitched his tent among us, right there in the midst of our camp, right there in the middle of our lives. And Jesus did that. He moved among us. He became a part of us, a part of the human race. God kind of united with the human race in that way. And then he lived and he died and he rose again to make a way for you and me to experience a new kind of exodus, to be redeemed, to be freed, to be rescued from whatever it is that binds us, whether it's sin or death or some other kind of oppression. Jesus came and died and rose again to rescue us, to pave a highway out of slavery and into freedom, into a new promised land. And then when he left, he didn't leave us alone. He didn't leave us to figure it out on our own. He left us with his Spirit. His Spirit to not just tabernacle among us, but to tabernacle inside of us. Jesus' Spirit is able to move into now not just our homes or our neighborhoods, but is able to move into our hearts. And so if that is a comfort to you, I want you to just wrestle with that. Just let that truth, the impact of that wash over you this morning. That the presence of the living God, the God who is so holy and unapproachable, and the floor under him looks like lapis lazuli, whatever that means. It sounds like it's blue based on the context there. But just like this God who is so glorious and so resplendent, the God who made the stars and the moon and the sun and the earth, the God who invented all the plants and animals, the God who invented you, is willing to make his home in your heart and wants to transform your heart, wants to make you new from the inside out. But maybe you've received that. Maybe you have said yes to that. Maybe that was recently, or maybe that was decades ago. But maybe you've said yes to that, and you've entered into this covenant, and you've been baptized, which is a sign of a promise. That's a sign of the promise. You've said yes to these promises. You've entered into this relationship with Jesus, and you're enjoying the feast. You come on first Sundays, and we break bread, and we drink a little bit of grape juice. And you're engaged in the new covenant. You've been marked by the blood of the Lamb. But maybe for some of you, the life change just isn't totally there. Maybe for some of you, you felt like Jesus kind of started to move into your heart and started to move the furniture around a little bit, and that made you a little uncomfortable. I just want to invite you, I want to challenge you. Just like a marriage can, you can redouble your efforts. You can recommit yourself to the covenant. I just wonder whether maybe somebody in here might need to do that. So I want to invite you to bow your heads with me. And we're just going to pray. And we're just gonna ask God to renew his covenant in our hearts, in our lives. Gracious and merciful God, your gospel is a word of comfort, and it's also a word of challenge. God, I just pray for those of us who need to feel that comfort this morning. God, I ask that, God, that you would speak to their soul, that you would speak deep in their heart, that you would remind them that you are the God who doesn't want to be a God just far away, up in heaven. You're a God who doesn't want to be just an idea. But God, you're the God who wants to move into our hearts, who wants to be close to his people, who wants to dwell with us. You are a God who is willing to unite himself to even so small and weak a people as I am, as those of us in this room. God, so for the people who need to hear that word of comfort this morning, God, speak comfort. Speak comfort to your people. Speak that word of invitation, that word of promise, that calling to enter into this love that is bigger than anything that they are gonna find anywhere else. This love that, whether they know it or not, they've been hungering and thirsting for their whole lives. God, invite them into covenant with you. Seal that treaty, that contract with them, God, this morning, here in this place. God, and maybe I'm aware, some of us in here, maybe all of us in here, if we've already entered into this covenant, if we've already entered into these promises, God, we all could use a quick second in front of the mirror to remind ourselves of the ways that our life is supposed to change, being in relationship with you. The way we're supposed to not just behave a certain way, not just give our offerings and give our time and go through the motions. But God, we're supposed to give our hearts. Like in a marriage, but even more so, God. We're supposed to give our whole selves. God, help us to be an all-in people this morning who remember that we are a people who have the living God living inside of us. May we not be timid. May we not be shallow. May we just be, in every way, in every respect, in every moment, may we just be yours. We just want to be your people, Jesus. We just want to be your people. Make us your people, Jesus. We just want to be your people, Jesus. Amen.